thanks everyone. Are you able to see this?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Mike Pham. I'm from the Wikimedia Foundation. Today I want to present some of the work we've done on a ChatGPT plugin that we created and launched. So a little bit of overview. I'm on the feature audiences team. And so this team is about building quick experiments to learn and or recommend where the Wikimedia Foundation should invest. So I think an important thing to note here is we're not trying to build full products. We're just trying to do some experiments and learn some things. So I think that context is helpful for the kind of the research I'm going to show here because there's going to be a lot of flaws. I saw a lot of the questions in the previous talk about, context windows, et cetera. And we're not trying to solve all of those problems right now. We're just trying to see kind of play around with this technology and learn a few things with what we were able to build. So I don't think I need to tell anyone here that large language models and ChatGPT have really changed how people can query these advanced ML models, and they can get text, code, images back. And so we wanted to kind of learn how this would affect Wikipedia and how Wikipedia can plug into that. It's a bit of a two-way street. And so we wanted to partner with OpenAI because creating and training these in-house LLMs is very expensive. It requires a lot of expertise. We didn't necessarily want to invest a lot of time and energy and money into this without kind of knowing how well these things would perform and what the optimal use cases and benefits are for us. What's the return on investment? So we were able to partner with OpenAI to test these hypotheses around the future of chat assistants in this context of information seeking, especially since they already had built this technology and we were able to work with them on it. So in July 2023, we launched a Wikipedia plugin for ChatGPT. So the plugin itself, it looks like this on the right side. The basic overview of how it works is the plugin will use the Cirrus Search API to find relevant Wikipedia articles. So similar to the last talk, given a query to ChatGPT and the plugin, there's a little bit of not summarization, but it will transform the original query into a more specific search query with search terms. And then it's going to return, excuse me, it's going to return the top 4 relevant articles from the search on the Wikipedia search. And then for now, it just returned the top 12 passages, just so we could avoid any of the context window problems. So 12 passages is, I think, roughly equivalent to like 12 paragraphs. Sometimes it's a little bit more or a little bit less. So as somebody noted, things at the bottom of the page, on the Wikipedia page, if it's very long, it wouldn't pick those up. So we would send all of that text from those top 4 relevant articles back to ChatGPT and ask it to summarize a response using only that info. So really trying to restrain it so it wouldn't try to pull from its own memory or pull from other sources, just really trying to restrict it a little bit. And then at the very bottom, you can see there's some disclaimer. It's a boilerplate saying that this information is from an LLM, so it might not be completely accurate. It includes links to licensing, and it includes links to cited articles. It was generally pretty good about this. Sometimes it wasn't the best, but that was one thing we were testing as well, how often this boilerplate would be included in the response. So the main questions we really wanted to address by using this plugin or launching this plugin is, one, is the technology good, basically? That's the second one. Sorry. The first one is a chat assistant like a new dominant paradigm? So this is really in the context of when ChatGPT came out, right? Everyone was going really crazy about it. It was making a lot of news. And so we were unsure about where, the internet was going, where chat assistants were going. So, our LLMs and chat assistants, the new dominant paradigm for information seekers, is everyone going to be moving off of Google, using chat assistants to get answers? And then also, like, who are the people actually using chat assistants? And I think implicit in that is, who are the people who may be using them in the future? And then the second question is, how accurate are the models themselves? Is the technology good? Is it reliable? Is it trustable? Especially in the context of retrieving and summarizing answers to these information-seeking queries. And then also we're interested in what are the perceptions of credibility, because those are two separate things, right? Like even if it's very, very accurate, but people don't really trust it, then they might not be using it in the end and getting the full potential out of it. All right. So the first section I want to go over is some data we got on the ChatGPT usage and who is using it itself. So the data is coming from two different sources here. In the yellow boxes, we have logging data. So this is just the data logs that we have collected through the instrumentation itself. In the green boxes, we ran a survey for about 2 weeks in September. So this was a link that was included in each of the responses to an English language survey. So users would get a response. They might see a link. They would see a link at the bottom if they wanted to take a survey. They could click through on it and then send us a response. There's nothing stopping them from taking it multiple times. So there's a little bit of, we're just trying to move quickly here. So we got about 71 participants. We threw out maybe a few because I think some were under 18. We didn't want to keep that data. And then there was at least one or two junk responses that were just gibberish. So we kind of threw those out as well. Um, trends and product features move really quickly in the space, as everyone knows. So I would treat this information more of a snapshot of what was happening in September 23 and the users who were most active at that time. And things may look completely different now and are almost guaranteed to look completely different. So the first thing we want to look at is users and messages. This is two graphs. The top one is how many users per day we had starting sometime in like mid-July and to about right now. And we can kind of see there's this big spike sometime in maybe let's say early August. I think this is when we released blog posts and we had publicity. We talked to media outlets. I think New York Times may have covered us. So this is when a lot of people kind of realized we had this and we see this big spike of unique users per day. And then there's this kind of drop off, I would say around October, and it's slowly been dropping. And message count is the second thing we're looking at, and that pretty much mirrors it as well. So that's probably pretty expected that the unique users and messages per day are going to be correlated with each other. So we see the same spike at the beginning of August-ish. We'd have pretty reasonable high usage. And then towards the end in October, we started to see a decline. And at the very end here, I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but plugins are essentially dead. So we kind of expect it to be going down and to be pretty low level these days. Yeah, so I have this in the notes too. Mid-November is, I think, when OpenAI got rid of plugins or the plugin market and started moving to GPTs. When we're looking at language and region, this is kind of interesting. So from the logs, we have the message language, the coding. English is the highest by far. And then we have Chinese, German, French, Japanese. This relative ranking is just from 1 week. So this actually changes. Everything after English will kind of change week to week. It's always about the same 5 or 6 languages that kind of move up and down, but these are not always in the same order. When we look at the geographic information, so if we look at the bottom one, this is from our data logs. And so we can see most uses from North America, and then Northern and Western Europe, followed by East and Southeast Asia. Central and Eastern Europe is this green slice, so that's kind of split up. So you can add that back onto the red for Europe, just because from the survey, we coded the regions a little bit differently. And so Europe is considered just one answer instead of split up in the same way. So proportionately, it actually kind of looks similar, with North America and Europe being the highest represented areas of users. There are a few different, I think, variations, once again, depending on who is more likely to self-report. And the bottom graph, I will say, does not include unclassified countries. This is more of a safety and privacy issue for us. There's certain countries that we do not collect data and we don't report from. And so there's some potential that this ranking may be changed based on if we were to include that data. But this is what it currently looks like. And then we have gender and age. And so once again, this is all from the survey. This is all self-reported data, and it will skew whichever way that tends to skew. We see that of that data, most of the users from the plugin that reported or took the survey are men by far. And age-wise, we see a lot of 26 to 45-year-olds. So let's call them like middle-ish aged men. We don't see a lot of representation from the extreme ends of the graph in terms of age. We don't see like as many older people. We don't see too many people under 18. Like I said, we had maybe one or two responses, but we didn't keep those ones. Um, okay, so this question is getting a little bit more nuanced. This is the top graph is from the survey, and we asked people, what do you use more when looking for information, the plugin or the website? And basically, we're seeing on the right side here that people reported that they use the site much more. Um, and then if we look at average queries per user per day, it starts kind of high around 8 and then it kind of drops. So we're looking at 4 to 6 queries per day per user on average. That means each person using ChatGPT is sending about 4 to 6 queries per day on average. There's some other data we have, which is click-through rate. So this is where we looked at all of the link previews that were generated in the response from the cited articles and how often people were clicking through to the Wikipedia links. And so how often is ChatGPT directing traffic back to Wikipedia, essentially? And we see it's roughly about 4%, which is what we see is on par with the click-through rate from Google search. So when we look at our data from how many people are clicking from Google search results page, traditional search, to Wikipedia, it's roughly about 4% as well. So it's looking quite similar. So I have a very kind of hesitant analysis of this. I don't know if it's how supported it is by all the data, but my gut intuition here is that users don't really seem to be interacting conversationally for information seeking, but they may just be using chat assistants, kind of like a super version of traditional search, and just one that kind of handles natural language better, maybe performs a little bit better. Um, and I think the logic here is the click-through rate is about the same. And I think that's kind of important because in a chat assistant, you could keep asking questions from the chat assistants if you wanted to get more answers from it. You could follow up questions, you can keep going. And the fact that people are still clicking through as if they were on a search page may be an indication that the thinking around it, the mentality might still be more like search than kind of switching that paradigm of how to use something. And then 4 to 6 queries per day, as it's declining, that's hard to read on its own. One interpretation is people are getting better at asking the right queries. The other is that, once again, they don't want to follow up. They're just asking a query, getting an answer back, and kind of finishing it. And it's not necessarily a conversation, it's just more a single transactional call and like a question and answer, which is something I think about with search, where you do a search, you get an answer back, and you're kind of done. And the reason you might do follow-up searches is if your query may be bad, for example, and you're kind of refining your query as you go. So once again, not enough information to say anything about this for sure, but that's kind of the intuition I have looking at it. We also asked survey users what their primary purpose for using the plugin is. We see a variety of different reasons, mostly personal interest topics, followed by academic research and professional work. If there's a long tail, this is an open-ended answer. People could write whatever. I think just one other interesting thing to note here is we also know that the highest peak usage of the plugin was midweek around like Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. Um, so make of that what you will, that you have the most usage during the middle of the work week, and it's mostly personal interest topics on ChatGPT Wikipedia plugin. Okay, so we go back to our main questions. Are LLMs and or chat assistants a new dominant paradigm for information seekers? Right now, I would say no, not yet. I don't think the internet has completely shifted over to chat assistants. I think people are starting to use them, but it hasn't like completely rocked the world. I think people are still in similar patterns as they were before. Users are still clicking through to Wikipedia to read more. Once again, they are presented with an assistant that can extract information out of Wikipedia, and they're choosing to click through to Wikipedia to read instead of continuing to query the chat system. And then the decreasing number of queries per conversation may also corroborate that, but once again, it's hard to say without more data. Who is using the ChatGPT plugin right now? We're seeing mostly middle-aged men from Europe and North America, a lot of Chinese and Japanese speakers too. From our perspective of future audiences, where we're really thinking about, who are the people who will be using this in the future? Who are the people not using this now? We know a lot of youth are on platforms like TikTok, getting information from social media, etc. This is not necessarily reaching out to them. This is not necessarily reaching out to people in the global south, for example, based on what we're seeing so far. And I think a big reason for that, of course, is the ChatGPT interface. To get to the plugins, you need to pay money. And so that is just going to be an inherent barrier to younger people who may not have the money and people in other parts of the world who may not have that money. All right. So next, we'll look at model quality. And we have more data here. This is from some internal annotation that we did. We used a random sample of logged queries, focused on about a half dozen major language that were the most represented and that we had native speakers or just fluent speakers for internally to look at responses and do some annotation, data annotation. We couldn't review the exact ChatGPT responses, but we were able to take the exact original query and regenerate a new response and annotate that. So it's not going to be exactly the same, but it's going to be roughly the same. And we just wanted to get a rough idea of how accurate and how relevant these answers are. So take these numbers with a grain of salt. But once we get into it, so relevancy, this is the question of when you're using a plugin, how often is the answer relevant to what you're getting, regardless of accuracy? Is it even trying to answer the question properly? So with the survey data, we asked this question, and most people said pretty often that the plugin is returning the information that they're looking for. Once again, accuracy is a completely different question, but at least on the surface, it looks like it's addressing the query itself. If we look at the internal annotation data, this chart's a little confusing to read. On the right side, where it says 100%, this is the total count. So 331 total queries that we looked at, split into 6 different languages. And if we look at everything in aggregate, we see that about 83, 84% of the questions were relevant, or answers were relevant to the questions that were asked. And it varies a little bit by language here, but I would say that just you have to keep the grain of salt here, because for French, for example, there was only 4 questions that we had to annotate. So 75% is just 3 out of 4, and that might not be a big enough sample size to really say anything about. But when we look at it in aggregate, 277 out of 331, that's about 84% relevancy. That's pretty good, but this also may reflect that the search relevancy itself is the problem more than the language model, because once again, the search is returning relevant articles, and if that's failing, then the language model can't really fill in the gap on it. It might try to on its own, but we're trying to restrict it from adding more information. Okay. And then we looked at accuracy. And so this is saying, look at the response that ChatGPT gives and just look through, try to essentially do a quick check of all the claims and make sure they're supported by the Wikipedia article. And we're using that as ground truth for this exercise, just to see how accurate it is, how much hallucinating it's doing, how much information it's making up. Once again, we have survey results here. How accurate do you think the information it provides is? Most people think it's pretty accurate, overwhelmingly more so. And I think the way to read this is actually that the plugin itself is more accurate when it's using Wikipedia in this conspicuous way. And once again, if we look at the annotation in the red box below, we see on the low end about 85%, to the high end about 91% overall, which is pretty good. If we look at Russian or German, we see that the percent is a lot lower in terms of accuracy. But once again, we have low sample sizes of only about 14 questions, and we only had, I think, 1 or 2 annotators for each of those languages. So this could also come down to the individual annotators themselves. Certain individuals are going to have a higher bar for accuracy or going to be a little bit more detail oriented. So the reason for this range is we had multiple annotators ideally look at each of the samples. And so sometimes they agreed, sometimes they didn't agree. And so depending on which I kept and which I threw out, I try to give a low range and a high range. But I would say overall, ChatGPT does a pretty good job of staying factual, especially when specifically prompted to restrict its answers to the content. I would say that this is a pretty high level of accuracy. So when we go back to the main questions, how accurate are the current generation of models in retrieving and summarizing answers? I would say pretty accurate, pretty relevant. Maybe a little less so for some languages. I don't know if that's improved, and we would probably have to do a lot more research to make sure that, just get more sample sizes to make sure it's actually staying on course there. But I think more importantly, what's interesting here is what are the perceptions of credibility? People generally trust information and a lot more when they know it's conspicuously, transparently coming from Wikipedia. And I think that's pretty important for us as a foundation to know that our brand is associated pretty strongly with credibility. And I think that's pretty good because the information itself is accurate and people trust us to be accurate. And those two things together are quite powerful. All right, so looking forward, I'll go over a little bit of what we're working on and I think try to tie this back to MediaWiki a little bit. This research wasn't done specifically with MediaWiki in mind. When I started putting the slides together for this conference, I was thinking about how it might tie back in, but I'm assuming everyone in this room is much more of an expert in me in MediaWiki and will be able to make a bit better connections than I am going to be able to. So the landscape moving forward with OpenAI is, of course, they're moving fast. We all know that they've had a lot of turmoil just inside the company itself, but also in the product that they're offering. So OpenAI has actually gotten rid of plugins pretty much completely and moved towards GPTs. This is why we see a huge drop in our usage for sure. It's now currently impossible to access the plugin that we built as it currently is constructed. We would have to create a GPT out of it, which is a personal assistant. And I think this is a move towards more specific task-oriented AIs. I think we saw a little bit of this in the last presentation of having specific agents that are going to do very specific tasks rather than having one super agent that's going to try to do everything. So we're going to see a little bit more of this fracturing, a little bit more very task-oriented AI, possibly with some AI coordination on layer on top of that to know which one of these specific task-oriented AIs to use. But this idea of really like fine-tuning the use and really kind of getting that domain of what this AI assistant is supposed to do very narrowly, I think is kind of where things are headed. And I think the other thing that we're seeing with the GPTs is this access to low code and no code programming. I see this as one of the biggest values that they're trying to push right now is just making it much more accessible for beginners to start programming and just get something off the ground. And it may not be perfect, but they can use natural language to just get something going with either low code or no code experience. I don't think they'll get as far as they need to with that an engineer could do, of course, because I think a lot of the programming difficulty is not just the syntax, but how do you think algorithmically? How do you think of how you're going to structure the conceptual flow, the logic itself? And I don't know if the AI is going to help somebody bridge all of those gaps immediately. In terms of what the foundation is working on, what I'm working on, I'm working on, we're calling it a fact checker. I put it in quotes. We're not going to actually call it that. I think that's a very loaded term. This is moving away from the chat assistant a little bit, and it might be using some of the underlying technology in similar ways of verifying information. And the basic overview is I want it to be very easy for people who are browsing the internet to, in a perfect world, like click on a sentence, maybe it's a Facebook post, maybe it's a Twitter post, maybe it's something out of just a blog. And then it's going to try to find supporting information on Wikipedia and say, oh, this claim is supported by Wikipedia. Here's a quote that supports it. You can click through, read more about it, or something along those lines. And I think the thinking here is information transparency increases credibility. We've seen that already. So we really want to associate that Wikipedia brand and that line of information from an external source back to Wikipedia, but not force people to go to Wikipedia. Like bring Wikipedia to where people are using the internet instead of always just trying to pull people into our website. I'm really thinking about how to increase the surface area of either consumption or contribution to Wikipedia. And this is one of the ways. And I think implicit in this, in my thinking, is thinking about the AI technology behind the scenes, and packaged in different specific use cases for people. So ChatGPT provides a really good technology, and it has its own interface, but it does require people to leave wherever they are and think about things differently and use a different tool in a different way. Um, and I think that I'm trying to see through that a little bit in the sense that, if we think about other previous technologies, like I could go do a spell check somewhere externally, check a dictionary, but that extra work makes it very difficult. And now spell check is kind of incorporated into a Word document or a word processing document, and you have a red underline or you have autocorrect, and that's a much smoother interface. It's much more natural. It's where people are already using the technology, and that's going to make it a little bit easier for the uptake, I think. So that's kind of the thinking, is seeing the technology for what it is and trying to see like maybe it fits behind the scenes better, and maybe not read ChatGPT as literally sometimes, for the final product, but like what is the technology capable of if we put it in different contexts. Um, and so, yeah, and how does this integrate into current experiences such as social media platforms? I don't want to create this opposing and almost antagonistic interface where people have to switch their attention back and forth. As far as MediaWiki and LLMs, I try to give a quick guess of how these two things could connect. LLMs do provide better natural language processing of queries, but you still need to couple it with search for best results. And I think we saw that in the last talk as well. So improving the search on the wiki itself, whether you're using, the Cirrus search extension or you're building out new ones or using Google or whatever, you really still need to put those two things together just because of that context window. The LLM can't see everything at once. So, how if you improve the search, then you're going to improve the ability of that chat assistant to be able to answer things correctly as well. As I mentioned, they're really good, these AIs, for low code, no code use cases. So if you have a lot of people building bots or plugins or extensions like we do at Wikipedia, this may make it more approachable for users to build better tools, more tools and extensions for everybody to be using or just for them to be using. This may lower that obstacle, the barrier of entry for them. And I think overall, we're seeing making data connectable is going to maximize the opportunity for these things to be useful, for these LLMs to be useful with whatever wiki, whether it's Wikipedia or another MediaWiki instance. If it's not able to connect properly, then the LLM is not going to be able to do much. And so I think really thinking about how the data is structured. Are the APIs good? Are they digestible? Is it easy to search, access, extract information from the wiki? The easier that is, the more use these LLMs will be, in conjunction with MediaWiki. And then finally, maybe this is more relevant to Wikipedia specifically, but people trust information more when they know it's coming clearly from a credible source. So for us, of course, that's Wikipedia. But I think also, if you have a chat assistant on your own website or somewhere else, and it's just the chat assistant giving an answer that's unattributed, I think the trust and credibility there is much lower than if there's a clear connection of saying, oh, when I checked this company's wiki documentation on whatever, this is the information I got. I think people in general are always going to trust that a little bit more when there's that transparent line back to the, not if not original source, a credible source. Um, so that might be something to keep in mind as well if you're building chat assistants that are connecting in with MediaWiki. Okay, so I'm at the end now. I'll do some quick conclusions and open it up for questions. So I think the conclusions we have here are LLMs, including ChatGPT, are pretty good at summarizing retrieved information, both in relevancy and in accuracy. But I don't see a lot of evidence that people are using it conversationally yet. It seems like they're still using it kind of like search or in the ways that they're familiar with otherwise. People trust information more when it's transparently coming from Wikipedia. I think that is good for our brand specifically. And also, as I was just mentioning, about how to attribute information and answers in a way that builds trust with the user. It seems unlikely Wikipedia will reach new audiences integrating with ChatGPT alone. So for us at WMF, if we want to reach younger people, people in different parts of the world, I don't think we can rely on this technology alone. It's not reaching all the new people and other users that we would want it to be reaching. We would have to integrate it with other things, have different ways of reaching people, I think. And then LLM technology will be folded into more familiar internet tools and pathways, such as traditional search, possibly in more of these behind the scenes ways where it's not immediately obvious to people that these technologies are being used. They're just enhancing the current experiences. I think we're already seeing this at Google, where they're folding in LLM technology into the traditional Google search and improving it. And I think we'll start to see more of that, where the current experiences and tools will just start getting the boost of these technologies slowly being merged into them. And then how can MediaWiki absorb some of these new capabilities in useful ways? How can it better integrate with them to maximize opportunities with external services? I certainly don't have all the answers here, but hopefully this provides some data for everybody to kind of see what it was like for us to have a plugin live in, deployed in ChatGPT with users, getting some information back. And hopefully this is helpful for everybody in how you want to integrate your own MediaWiki work with this LLM technology in the future. All right, that's it. That was a little fast, but hopefully it all made sense. So thank you to everybody, especially the people I worked with at WMF and Wikimedia Enterprise, and for everybody here. All right, thanks. All right, I'm just looking at the
Hey, Mike,
questions.
thank you so much for giving this presentation. It was very insightful, and given the Wikimedia Foundation's, significance in the world, seminal work that's being done here, in my opinion. I do apologize in advance. I am very jet lagged right now, and I'm operating at a slower clock rate than usual. So please give me some patience for my questions. But uh, essentially, I don't think I saw it mentioned anywhere in the presentation explicitly, but just to clarify, is this basically an RAG model that you're approaching this with?
When we first started developing this, I don't know if I had seen RAG as a term that was being thrown around as much. But essentially it is, from what I've seen. I think specifically, like I said, the what happens is the user sends a query, ChatGPT takes that original query, converts it into search keywords, something that is better for our search engine. Then we run our essentially Elasticsearch over Wikipedia to return the articles and content from those articles. And then we use ChatGPT to re-summarize that content as an answer to the original question. So I think conceptually that is RAG, but that's not the way that I had been framing it until more recently, I think, in terms of like the architecture.
I see. I think it's RAG, which is good, right? That's the currently the prevalent industry direction that we're taking. But then that moves on to like the specific details. I think you mentioned, was it the top four articles that Cirrus Search would return? Any specific insights as to how you pick these specific numbers, and is this to make sure that you're sticking within the token limit that ChatGPT presented to you?
Yes, correct. We're returning the top four search results, so the top four articles, and then let's say the first 12 paragraphs from each of those. And that was to stay within that token length, as you said. Once again, this is not supposed to be a polished product. We more or less arbitrarily chose those numbers because we knew it would come in underneath that context window. And it worked pretty well most of the time. I think if this were a full product, of course, we're going to like make sure that we can improve that in many different ways. How can we retrieve the correct passages? Um, how can we just really fine tune that? But in terms of the experiment, I didn't feel as if that was going to necessarily answer more questions for us, right? Um, the questions we were looking to answer, we were getting pretty close to being able to get good data from that and good answers without having to spend a lot of time fine-tuning it and improving it as if it were a fully fledged product.
I see. Awesome. Yeah, just wanted to see if the the four things, you came up with it through like, trial and error, or if it was just chosen. I just wanted to see if there was like a Goldilocks situation, or scenario. Like, I'm bad at English right now, but just I was curious if it's something that you arrived at through experimentation. But it's good to know, and I think these are really promising results, and I congratulate all of you for doing it. And thanks for answering my questions.
Thanks so much.
Hello, this is Markus Krutsch. Thanks for your talk. Very interesting. One thing I was generally wondering about regarding the rise of LLMs in Wikipedia context is to what extent Wikipedia is put into risk by being like everybody who's providing content, right? I mean, at the end, all content can be ingested into LLMs, and people just don't need to go to Wikipedia at all. I mean, you are saying inside Wikipedia you can build services which will increase the surface for people to become editors. But of course, there's a realistic scenario that external actors will simply provide the same services without directing anybody to Wikipedia directly. And right now, you already have situations where ChatGPT is giving you some answers and they are wrong, and you ask, how do you know that? And it's telling you, I got that from the Wikipedia article, because that seems plausible, so it says so. It can even generate the citations, the quotes from the page for you, which are also wrong, if you ask for it. The situations that people trust Wikipedia at the moment, when it's widely known and so on, doesn't seem to be very reassuring to keep its marketplace. Obviously, OpenAI should have an interest in keeping Wikipedia very much alive and well, because they also rely on the information for many of their tasks. So, do you have any concerns of that kind? And do you have any tactics or strategies of how Wikipedia can make sure to stay in the loop of the information flow of the future when these kind of agents and services become even more widespread?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a really good question. Very wide question. I'll try to address what I can and what I can remember. Um, there's a lot of points. We are working more generally beyond just my team with partnerships with OpenAI and starting conversations with other companies who are training on our data, of course, and trying to just stay in the loop with all of these things. Um, and in terms of the attribution, like you said, anybody could be building plugins like this or things that reference Wikipedia. Um, I think one thing that was interesting for me is the point I made about our brands being very credible with the information quality. And of course, another provider can say, "Oh, we're pulling information from Wikipedia," but I wonder if that would have the same trustworthiness as, say, an official Wikipedia plugin or an official Wikipedia thing, or if somehow we can associate our brand with something like, if we can verify information online and in a world where there's like a Wikipedia, check this is verified or something, I think that's more trustworthy than saying like, oh, Facebook verified this with Wikipedia, right? I don't think Facebook has the same kind of reputational status in terms of information. So that's an idea that I've been thinking about a lot is, how valuable is our brand in terms of reassuring users, and how do we kind of make that more visible, more prominent for people, and not just like, I think it's one thing to know your information is coming from Wikipedia because everybody who's using ChatGPT knows it's coming from Wikipedia, but I think it's different to say like, you know, not necessarily putting our reputation on the line, but making that association very clear, like, oh, we support this plugin or this extension, and this is us saying that this information is good and associating it with our content, etc. I don't think that's something other people can replicate in the same way just because they're not us and they can't necessarily just use our brand and trademarks without us, for example. So I think there's something of value in our brand there in terms of also providing credibility to users. I hope that answered at least most of your questions. And it looks like we're out of time, so I think I will have to pass it on, and I'll try to address what I can in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Mike. There is one more question in the chat, but I think you can answer it maybe online because we're running out of time a little bit.